Long ago, the Cosmere lived in harmony. Not like Sazed, just chugging along. Then, everything changed when the Dawnshards attacked. Well, every Cosmere content creator has tackled them. Now it's my turn. Class is in session. This foundational lesson will spoil most books in the Cosmere, most specifically Dawnshard, Sunlit Man, Isles of the Emberdark, Warbreaker, and Wind and Truth. Also, we'll be making a quick reference to White Sand for a one-off joke. The Dawnshards. 4 primal, divine tools Adonalsium used to command the very Cosmere into existence, allegedly. Sometimes called weapons, feared even by Shards. We know there are 4, and we know at least a little bit about 2 of them. What else do we know? What else can we theorize on? Before we get started, if you want to enroll in the course on Cosmere lore, make sure to click the subscribe button down below. Now, on to the lesson. We can quickly go over the 2 we know about, change and exist. The first thing we know about change is it isn't as simple as change. That just seems to be the closest word to describe it. Ryzen, after holding it for a few hours, gives us a better sense of what she starts to feel the command truly means. It was then that she grasped, in the smallest way, the nature of the command inside her. The will of a god to remake things, to demand they be better. The power to change. Ryzen, at least, believes the meaning of it conveys some kind of improvement. She also thinks to herself the word remade, capitalized, and we all know how important anything branding capitalizes is. Then exist. This one we know even less about. We know a former bearer of it describes it as diametrically opposed to the concept of violence and harm. To me, this suggests that this Dawnshard is the one of creation, life, and healing. That you're commanding something to exist, not as in stay as you are, but as in calling forth something into being from nothing. Look at the powers Nomad gains from his torment. At 1,000 BEUs, his strength and endurance are enhanced, like an augmenter fabrial, becoming more of what it already is. At 2,000, his healing powers get more efficient, using up fewer of his resources to heal him. Powers of progression and regrowth. By my estimation, we have one Dawnshard which creates something out of nothing, and another which takes what is there and rearranges it. So here are my thoughts on the 2 to round out that list. Remain and end. I believe remain is the command telling something to resist change, whether that's normal entropy or some arcane attempt at manipulating something. Remain is the command which says simply, no. Stay as you are, unchanged. Finally, appropriately, end. Not every arcana is about healing or growing. Plenty of them are destructive. We even have an entire shard devoted to reducing things. I believe, therefore, we need a Dawnshard whose command encompasses that aspect of existence, its cessation. Night must always fall at end of day. Shut up, Taldane. I'm sure many of you are asking, why those 2? Valid question. Here's my reasoning. Brandon has paid homage to real-world cultures before. The simple rules of Threnody, soul stamps in the Rose Empire. For something as primal, as iconic, as the very force which commanded the Cosmere itself into being, I speculate he would find something which resonates across the globe, something so intrinsic to the human psyche that traditions spanning centuries and continents would all have their own version. There is a triumvirate which many world cultures have independently acknowledged, the cycle of creation, change, and the final ending. The 3 aspects of Hecate, maid, mother, and crone. The fates, spinning the thread, weaving the tapestry, and finally cutting it. In Hindu tradition, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva are responsible for creating the world, maintaining it, and ultimately destroying it. The list goes on. The universal truth is that humankind, over and over, has defined the fundaments of reality itself as creation, change, and destruction. Since we already definitely have change and seem to have creation and exist, it seems that Brandon's intention is to replicate this tradition in his Cosmere and have the foundation of all existence to be the commands to be, change, end, and since he wants a 4th, I suspect it will be remain, since that nicely rounds it out to balance on the 2 axes. Exist, the diametric opposite of violence, is matched by the command of destruction. And then change is constrained by the command that sometimes things should just stay as they are for now. Another reason is that we're told The Dawnshards called the Cosmere into existence. They are primal, divine commands. Every arcana requires, in part, a command. My suspicion is that every command in the Cosmere is derived, ultimately, from one of these 4 shards. They are the grandparents of every command mortals use. That means, since arcana can do nearly anything, these 4 commands must encompass every conceivable action. There can be no gaps. Think of it like CRUD, if you know data management. That acronym encompasses everything you can do with data. You can create, read, update, or delete. To make room for remain, think of that as locking data behind auth, restricting people from changing or removing it. The point is, any other examples I've heard of the possible Dawnshards leaves gaps. There are potentially commands out there which are outside the purview of those examples. This is only my speculation, but I think the Dawnshards have to cover every possibility. Let's go over the list of Dawnshards and how some of the commands we know are derived from them. We'll start with the most obvious. Change. There's literally an entire surge about it. Anytime a surge binder turns rocks into grain, they're commanding it to change. Exist. This one is a bit trickier because there really aren't a lot of examples of something being called into being out of nothing. Anything which looks like it might fit, like Aether Spores, you could make the case that it's just turning investiture into matter, not creating out of nothing. The examples I'll use then come from Zelyon's torment powers. We know when he's got a certain baseline of investiture, he's stronger and tougher, like Burning Pewter, and also he'll automatically heal. I think these are 2 good examples of the exist command. I believe it not just calls things into being from nothing, it enhances any given trait, like an augment or fabrial. So Allomantic, Pewter, or Tin, which takes natural abilities and makes them stronger, I would say derive from exist. And then Regrowth, which you can check out my latest video for a deep dive. I think healing and growing both count as exist, not just turning one thing into something else, but actually more than what it was. For Remain, we don't have a lot of examples. It's a pretty reactive power. Most of the time it's resisting an arcana, so we'll only see it as a way to stop something else. I think Allomantic Copper is a good example of the command, to remain, keeping the burner's emotions from being affected, as well as damping down the rhythms of other metals around it. Another would be Allomantic Cadmium, slowing down time, literally reducing the effects of entropy. It doesn't go all the way to stopping a thing from changing, but it slows that change down a great deal. And lastly, End. Rather than point to any one specific command, I'm actually going to highlight a trend. Hemalurgic constructs, Lifeless, the Charred, Shades. What do they all have in common? Each of them are made by taking something greater and reducing it to less than the sum of its parts, but with unique and useful abilities. Not to mention, in almost all cases, it results in a creature which at best struggles against bloodlust. In Elegy's own words, I fight. It's what I do. When asked what kind of person she is, she replies, one on fire, burning with the fight. There are only 2 beings which fit to this category I can think of which aren't overtly known as being mindlessly violent. The Lifeless, who don't seem to have any particular drive and simply follow specific commands. And even then, isn't it notable that almost every Lifeless is a soldier? And the Kandra. Only 2 spikes, and the least changed out of all hemalurgic constructs. While they are, ironically, known as being forbidden to kill humans, that's not their nature. That's an imposed law that is indoctrinated into them. Why is that such an important rule? Without it, was it their natural tendency towards violence? Perhaps a question to ask Brandon someday. And I have a very old version of the surge binding chart Brandon made in 2003. Note in the middle, the 4 forces making a pattern are life, decay, stasis, and time. I know this isn't any kind of canon, but it does show that from the very start of the Cosmere, Brandon has been thinking about pairing those 4 concepts: creation, death, preservation, and change. I have one last reason to tout my own theory. It's already seen success. I came up with this theory after Dawnshard came out. I guessed that Hoid's Dawnshard would be called something like creation, and it turned out to be the command to call things into existence. So it's a theory with a good track record. And this ends my attempts to define the Dawnshards. This next section is going to address speculation I have on phenomena throughout the long timeline of the Cosmere, which I believe are hints to where the Dawnshards have popped up here and there. We know at least some modern holders of change and exist, though we also know Zelyon has lost exist by the time of Sunlit Man. There's an implication way back to Hoid, though I'm not sure if that's confirmed. If anyone knows any confirmation, feel free to comment with it down below. But what do we know about the others? I'll start with Remain. We know the Society of Dragons of Yolen had one, though it's no longer the room where it was once kept. So where is it now? I suspect Frost. We know he was at the Shattering. We know the 4 Dawnshards were present at the Shattering. We know he is a force within Draconic society. We know the dragons had a Dawnshard. There are snippets from the letters Hoid and Frost have exchanged, which I find relevant. Hoid's includes in his salutation, "As you are now immortal." That is an interesting phrase. Obviously, all dragons are long-lived, but saying it like that doesn't sound like Hoid means, "As you are immortal to the same extent to which you have always been." It sounds like something has changed. We know Frost is not a shard, so what could make him even more immortal than most dragons? Perhaps a Dawnshard of stasis? The other line I wish to bring up is from Frost's reply. He calls Hoid smelly, then apologizes for having been so extreme and brash. That's odd, right? I think the vast majority of people who know Hoid would say that calling him smelly is an understatement compared to what most would call him. The core argument between Hoid and Frost in this Cosmere is whether it's best to try and fix things or back off and leave everything as it is, just let things play out. Frost holds the position of, we should just sit back. But I think this isn't just his stance on interstellar divine politics. He considers it extreme just to toss a half-hearted insult at Hoid. I look at this and I see a being who is too passive to be easily explained. I think this suggests something powerful is actually influencing Frost, that his torment might not just be an inability to harm like Zellion has, but an overall difficulty acting at all. And so we finish with End. I believe we've seen its fingerprints throughout the book so far. I'm far from the only person with this theory, but let's take a look at Nalthis. Shashara was the genius behind Nightblood. She had another huge breakthrough. She came up with the most efficient possible command to awaken the lifeless. A single breath to power a tireless warrior. Then she did the unthinkable. She awakened Steel to make an entirely new personality. Something even Vasher says shouldn't have worked, having done it. And the command they used. Destroy evil. But why? I believe we'll discover that End was the key to it all. It certainly makes sense that if Hallandren somehow got access to a Dawnshard, they would give it to one of their scholars to study. As I've already mentioned, all the undead creations of the Cosmere seem to fall under the same penumbra. The breath and body of many people reduced to a single being used for violence and war. Her great contribution wasn't some trick of mechanics or experimentation with a new Ichor alcohol formula. It was figuring out the perfect command to make a lifeless. This could be explained by the divine command with sway over this aspect of investiture influencing her thoughts. It would also explain why she was able to make Nightblood. Even having been part of the creation, even having 3 centuries further experience, Vasher might not be able to replicate this feat. What is the missing X factor? What does Vasher lack, which Shashara had? It might just be talent, knowledge, the experience of having taken the lead on the project. Or it might be she had a tool he lacks. And for that matter, why that command? Destroy evil. Was there an express evil to be destroyed? Monsters or demons roaming the countryside? One interpretation is they just thought of any citizen of another nation as evil, which was part of what sparked the Many-War, but that seems out of character for both Warbreaker and Shashara, at least Shashara some of the time. More on that in a moment. Perhaps the way lifeless are most often commanded into being as soldiers, since Shashara was using the ultimate command of destruction, she was limited and had to pick a command to destroy something. If so, picking evil does sound like a safe option. But let's circle back to Shashara's personality, and personality shift. Everything we hear about Shashara makes her sound like a lovely person. She told Nightblood he could be a poet. Everyone who speaks of her makes her sound like rainbows and sunshine, though granted that's her husband and brother, so she could be on a bit of a pedestal there. But ultimately, she slaughters untold armies and wants to release the knowledge of how to create these weapons of mass destruction to the point that Vasher feels he needs to kill her to stop the madness. Is it just me, or does it sound like at least one possible interpretation of that data is that something changed? The way someone who holds exists long enough can't injure people. At extremes can't even eat meat. What if holding the Dawnshard of End influenced Shashara to the point of devaluing human life? Maybe even the thirst for violence, which so many of the undead creatures of the Cosmere seem to face. That's at least one explanation for the apparent change in personality. Then, of course, Vasher killed her, with Nightblood. I doubt even Nightblood can destroy a Dawnshard, so it's still out there somewhere, if she was the Dawnshard. It seems Vasher did not know, and we're not sure anyway what happens when a Dawnshard is unalived. We get a threat in Dawnshard, but not a lot of specifics.
Perhaps Endowment scooped it up. She might have had plans. So where is it now? Well, we're looking for a future organization obsessed with Dawnshards. One which heavily uses the arcana of end, such as having strong command over shades and crafting spikes out of souls to track things down. Something perhaps named after dusk or night, as Brandon generally uses to signify the conclusions of things, in contrast to how he uses dawn to represent beginnings. But I can't think of anything fitting that bill, so I guess it's back to the drawing board. And here endeth the lesson. What do you think? Have I swayed you? And am I full of malarkey? For your homework, tell me in the comments below which Dawnshards you think there are, or where you think the other Dawnshards are now, and where they've been this whole time. Which one did Talon try to use against cultivation? When did Hoid get exist? Until next time, class dismissed.